My name's Rob Clarke from Clarke's Custom Flies, and today we're going to tie a pattern called the Lady Caroline. It's a classic steelhead pattern developed actually in Scotland in the 1830s on the River Spey. Again, kind of speculation on who actually tied it, who was the first one to tie it, whether it being done that far back. But in all the books from Price and Tennant's and many other books from the late 1800s and stuff, the pattern is in there. It was originally developed as a Atlantic salmon pattern, but has been widely used now in Canada and most of North America as a steelhead pattern. It varies in different sizes and shapes and colors, but the premise of the pattern itself is all the same. We're not going to tie it exactly traditional. We're going to tie it for more of a North American steelhead pattern. And we're going to tie it actually a fairly large size in most cases. Won't be fished here, but should be fished here in this size. I know many people that do, and I do, but it's rarely tied in this size. We're actually going to tie it on a 3/0 hook. So let's get ready to tie the pattern. The hook I'm going to use today is a Partridge Bartlett CS10/1 and a 3/0. It is considered a high water hook, heavy wire, durable, good hook gap, and again, quite a large hook when you see it. Get this in the vise. The Bartlett style hook has this nice flowing shape that I like to it, similar to the Daiichi 2051 Alec Jackson hook. Is a good substitute for this as well, but I really like this hook. Good heavy wire, good sink rate, just a large, nice hook in general. Worth the money to buy. So again, this is a Partridge CS10 Bartlett /1 and a 3/0. The thread that I'm using today is the UTC 70 in black. You can use the 140 in the beginning to get your initial base thread. But the 70 works fine on that as well. And if you're going to do a floss body on this fly, the 70 will give you a cleaner body. But we're going to use dubbing today, and we're going to get ready to start the fly. I'm going to start my thread right here. Again, about halfway on the return eye. There's the return eye on the hook. I do it about halfway so as I can lock in that return eye. And it gives me, again, just a bit of a measurement for the front of the hook for when I do my head and I don't crowd the eye too much and I wrap my collars. So we're going to put this on. We're going to lock that return eye in very well with touching turns on the thread. I have fairly large tag on the most on my thread, but I keep it down here on a 45-degree angle. With this being a synthetic thread, those thread wraps tend to slide together and keep those nice thread wraps tight. But again, we're doing a dubbing body, but I'm actually opening up my thread wraps a bit on this longer hook and bringing it back. I will be bringing the thread back to just about halfway between the barb of the hook and the point of the hook, because we're going to put a small tag on here. So we're right, back it up a turn or two actually, maybe 3, there we go. Now we're about halfway between the point of the hook and the barb of the hook. This is where we're going to start our tag, and our tag will be consisting of medium oval silver tinsel. Moving to the medium size or the large size can be used on this because of the size of the hook. Again, I usually use most of my tinsels on most of my flies a little bit smaller than what they call for. I find the flash is a little better, and I find they tie a little bit neater. When I go to put my oval gold tinsel on, I'll bring the oval gold tinsel to the front of the hook, slide it underneath the thread, and bring it up and over to the front side of the hook, which is facing me on the return eye side. This locks the tinsel in for any little bit movement that I want to do, and the bobbin will allow just the weight of the bobbin will hold that in place. nicely and firmly, and I can make some movements. I'm going to keep all my tinsels and most of my materials on the front side of the hook. It's a habit I've gotten into for doing floss bodies, to bring it up to the return eye to get rid of that step, just to clean up the bodies and clean up the hooks. I'm going to make 2 or 3 thread wraps forward just to lock it in place and make sure that's where I want it. I'm going to trim my gold tinsel right at the edge of my return eye, and I'm going to do touching turns of my thread right to the point of the hook. Now we're bringing our tag to the point of the hook, and actually what the point of the hook gives us is a reference to the flat portion of the top of the hook. So when we put our tail and stuff in, everything will sit nice and neat. We come off the curve and up to the flat point of the hook. I'm going to do some large spiral wraps forward to get my bobbin out of the way and give me room to wrap my oval tinsel. Now when I wrap my oval tinsel, the first turn will be on the bare hook itself, and then I'm going to bring touching turns up onto the thread wraps, forward to the point of the hook right here. So there's our tag length. It's approximately 6 or 7 turns. It's 90 degrees with the hook point, and now I'm going to bring my thread back, and my thread now ends directly at the 90-degree point too, as well on the oval gold tinsel, which allows me to come up underneath and lock it in place right at that point. I'll do 2 or 3 turns forward and just lock it in. Now since we're doing a dubbing body, I should say, I'll do a couple more wraps forward. I'm going to take the oval gold tinsel, because we're going to use it as a rib as well, fold it back underneath and wrap my thread back to the beginning of the tag end. Now we can bring that forward and wrap it up as a rib. Also, we don't have to cut it and return it back on, because we're not doing a floss body. It'll hide that little step and imperfection there. The second thing I'm going to put on is a flat gold tinsel, because we're going to run 2 tinsels up on this fly. This happens to be a flat gold embossed tinsel. You can use just regular gold, you can use silver, depending on the fly and the colors that you're tying. You can go ahead and use whatever tinsels you like color wise, and go from medium to large to small, again depending on the size of the fly that you're tying. I'm going to put the flat tinsel on same way as I did the oval, right up and over, lock it in place, put it in my material clip out of the way. There we go. Now I'm going to lock it in place, 3 or 4 wraps forward. Make sure it's good and in place and out of the way. And now I'm actually going to tidy all this up. I'm going to come all the way forward with my thread, fairly open wraps, and keep both tinsels on the front side of the hook facing me, and that's also on the return eye side to eliminate that step. I'll trim my flat now just before I get there to where the return eye step is. Lock those in and come back again with fairly large spiral wraps. Going back, locking in our materials, and bringing the thread back right to the top of the tag again. Some Lady Carolines, when you see them tied, some of them have tails at the back, some of them don't. I prefer to put a tail in, and again, depending on the pattern itself, would depend on which tail that I put in. The tail that I'm going to use today is off a golden pheasant, and this is a golden pheasant skin right here. Golden pheasant skins and some of the other pheasant skins are cost effective. You get multitudes of feathers and all the feathers that you're looking for off the skin for a relatively inexpensive price. What I'm going to use on the skin itself is these red breast feathers right here for a tail. I'm going to select one. Sort through one, find some good long one here. Pull it off the skin. And when you pull these feathers off the skin, separate the feather from the pile that you want. Take the feather and bend the feather towards you, and it'll break off. So I have one golden pheasant skin, one golden pheasant breast feather. This nice red and yellow. We're going to use this as the tail. So I'm going to trim off this bottom end. I'm going to take, so now we have the golden pheasant feather like this. There is a concave side and a flatter side. I have a shiny side where the color is nice and a color where the color is dull. That side where the color is dull, we're going to put the feather on this way, but we're going to take our thumb and forefinger of our left hand, and we're actually going to fold the feather in half. So we get this nice little red tail to stick out the back. Now when I lay the tail onto the hook, I want that tail to be just about at the curve of the back of the hook. That's where your length is going to be. So you don't want it to extend past the back of the hook. You want it to be pretty much right on the back of the hook. So now that I've sized it, I'm going to come in with my left hand, pinch it, come up with a pinch loop and come straight down. 1 turn, 2 turn. And all I'm going to do now is let the weight of the bobbin and those 2 turns hold the tail in place. And I'm going to make sure it's sitting nicely up top and not to one side. I'm going to come in with my left hand again and hold it. I will trim the excess off back here. I will now come in and lock that tail section in. Just like that. So you can use golden pheasant feathers, you can use ringneck pheasant feathers, you can use a multitude of different feathers back here for their tail, depending on the style and color that you're tying. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do a dubbing body. The dubbing that I've chose to use today is Ice Dub Peacock and Black. Ice dubbing is a great steelhead dubbing, synthetic, widely available in a multitude of colors, has a nice sheen and gloss to it. So you can change up your body colors relatively quickly with nice and simple dubbing such as this. It flows onto the thread very nicely. Again, I won't use any dubbing wax. Just wet my finger, forefinger and thumb, and wet the thread just slightly. And I'm going to pinch off small, minute amounts of the dubbing. The body on a Lady Caroline is relatively thin. They used flosses, and actually on the original pattern they used wool. So you can use Antron wools, single strand. You can buy it in a spool such as your thread, or you can go to a local craft shop and buy a roll of Antron wool and use a single strand if you want to tie more traditional. I'm going to layer the dubbing on little bits at a time. Keep it tight, but keep it relatively thin. You want this fly to have a quick sink rate, and that's the whole idea of a little bit thinner body. And we're going to go about halfway up on this fly because we actually have a middle hackle that we have to put on. Okay, so now I have my dubbing set halfway up the body. From the eye to the tip of here, it's approximately halfway. So the dubbing is now set, and what I'm going to do is tie in our body hackle. the body hackle on a Lady Caroline is generally done with herring. Herring is a little bit difficult to get at times. There are some good suppliers of herring, and one of them being Canadian tube fly, and some of your local shops will carry from Canadian tube fly as well. You can get herring dyed now. You can get it in black. You can get it in natural colors. But there are also some good, a little less inexpensive substitutes out there for this hackle, this long flowing hackle. Blue-eared pheasant is widely used now, natural colors and dyed. Shallapin can be used, and rhea can be used when it's found on that as well. The whole idea of the Lady Caroline was originally tied as a shrimp pattern. And these long heron hackles and these long flowing hackles here are supposed to imitate the multitude of legs on a shrimp. So this is why this is used. It gives lots of flowing motion, lots of movement to this pattern. And this is a heron feather right here. As you can see, long, thin barbels on here. Thin, relatively thin stem. And we're going to have to peel all these back to find a tip. It is a delicate feather to work with at times, so you need to take your time and look at where the stem is and how we're going to do this, and make sure you have your proportions right, that the feather that you're using is large enough to meet up to the top of the fly. So I'm literally going to go down to 2 barbels right here to tie in as a tip. Again, it has a concave side as well, a shiny and a flat colored sides. The shiny side is going to go towards you, the front of the hook, and a concave side against. So I put my tip in, I've tied it 4 or 5 wraps forward. I'm going to take my tip, fold it back. Long, long barbels on here. Fold it back. And lock that tip in. Just like so. This is where it's going to begin to get a little bit tricky. These are some techniques that I'll show you for this, because we're actually going to be bringing up our ribbing through this feather, our second ribbing, because there'll be 2 ribbings on here. And now we're going to continue to dubbing our body forward. It's important to kind of keep an eye on your distances and keep an eye on your proportions on this fly. The body is relatively simple, but it still needs to be looked at as far as proportions, size, and distance from the eye. Because when we get down to the eye, towards the eye to finish the fly, we have several different colors to put on before we put the low slung wing on. I'm just wrapping this dubbing forward, keeping it relatively thin and tight. Just about there, just need a little bit more. I'm just going to come forward. There we go. Now I have a little bit of excess dubbing that I don't need. So the nice thing is with dubbing is you can hold your thread straight, tight, and pull back down on the dubbing and put it back in the package. So now we're done with our dubbing body. I'm just going to do a few wraps forward towards the eye and towards the back to start my base on the front portion of the hook that I didn't have thread on. So our next step will be, is we want to put in our flat gold tinsel ribbing. We're going to do 5 to 6 turns only. I'm going to utilize the rotary portion of the vise, and at the same time we kind of have to work around our heron feather. So it's important to take our time. We can move our heron feather slightly forward. We're going to take our rotary portion of the vise, and actually just before I do that, just to make sure everything's safe, I'm going to put a quick whip finish in right here at the end, just in case that would have happened. So that when I was wrapping all my tinsels together, I would not lose the end of the fly. Get my thread started again. There we go. Okay, so our flat tinsel first will come up and over. We can take our hand, or preferred method is to use a bodkin to help keep these fibers out of the way and wrap our flat tinsel forward. Now you're going to have to play with the distances of your ribbing as you go, because you want this flat tinsel to come up right in behind the heron stem, so that we can use the heron to follow, the heron stem to follow the ribbing of the flat tinsel. Just take your time, don't rush it. Nice and slow. I think we're on it here. All I'm doing is using my bodkin to move the fibers of the heron out of the way as I turn. If it looks like you're going to lock some in, just take your time. So that one turn came just in behind the thread, just behind the stem of the heron. The next turn comes just in front of it, and that's exactly what you want for your starting point. Now we're going to continue to wrap forward, trying to keep our spacing the best we can. Come with our final turn right around and underneath the hook. Lock it in. Make sure our fibers are out of the way. Come out 90 degrees with our flat. A couple of turns and trim. This is where it gets fun, and this is where it gets interesting. The more materials we add on, and when we add on that heron hackle or any fly that you tie with a hackle that's in the middle of the body, you have to work around it. But this is where you just take your time. Key is to take your time, stay focused, and a rotary vise does help a lot in this. So now we're going to bring our heron forward. We're going to come in behind the flat tinsel. So back into the flat tinsel, we're going to try and run our stem exactly behind that flat tinsel, and at the same time we want to keep our barbels from folding off underneath each other. Slowly bring them forward, teasing your fibers up and out. You're staying right in behind the flat tinsel, just like so. And now you should have enough of your heron left for at least 1 or 2 turns at the end of the fly body. There we go. Lock that stem in at 90 degrees. Trim the stem off. Keep it underneath, because it's very critical on this pattern to keep this section very flat for when we do our collars, and especially when we put our hood on, and I'll explain when we get to that point. So we keep everything nice and even, nice and flat. Is why I put all my stems, all my ends of my ribbing and stuff up flat underneath, just like this. So now this is what you should be looking at. If this was blue-eared pheasant or any other type of hackle that you've used, you've got your body hackle halfway up, and now we're going to bring our rib up. The second rib traditionally would come over as a crisscross. But the main function of the second rib is to protect the stem of this little bit delicate feather from the fish on the back end. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring our oval gold tinsel. I'll pick up my bodkin. And we're going to follow, again, the back end of the flat gold tinsel. Just take your time by moving the barbs out of the way of the heron feather. Sometimes you can just flick them up and flick them out of the way. You want them to be as close. You want this oval to be as close to the flat tinsel as you can get it, right up against it. And as you get into the thicker barbels, things get a little thicker and tighter. Just take your time and use your bodkin to move these barbs out of the way. Now what you're doing now essentially as we get into this, where the hackle actually is, this oval gold tinsel is coming in and locking the stem of the feather in and protecting it as we fish it and as we go. Because it can be, like I said, relatively fragile. We wouldn't want all this hard work to go to waste on the first fish. So this helps protect stem and barbs and helps lock in your body. As we get closer, it gets a little more. There we go. It's just as easy sometimes to break some barbels off, but you'd like to try and keep as many as you can to get the effect that you're looking for. So now I bring my oval around and under, do a complete turn to lock it into place. Okay, now that we've fought through that, our next step will be is to add our first collar. We're going to leave these up in this high position for the first collar, and the first collar will be we are using the barred mallard flank again. This happens to be dyed blue. I just wanted to add a little bit of contrast color in here, and the added collars in the front now will help thicken up and bolster up that front end. And when the fly is being fished, these actually thicker, heavier, stiffer fibers will actually help that fly have some lift in the water. So when you're swinging the fly down through the current, this heavy hook and this heavier fly isn't just dropping straight to the bottom like a nose. It'll actually give it some lift. That's why the additional collars on the front. And this gives you an opportunity now to add more color for your region, for your area, and create your own little style. I've taken the bottom of the feathers off again so that I've created what we wanted. Thin stem again, thick stem, and we're going to fold these barbels down. We're not going to put a whole lot of these wraps on here. We're doing accent colors and highlight colors. And this is an opportunity now for you to put some additional colors into your Caroline. Again, shiny side towards me, stem down on the 45, your tip, 2 or 3 wraps forward, fold the tip back, and wrap it back. Now I will come in at this point and trim out this tip. And the reason why I'm trimming this tip out is it's a little stiff, it sits a little high, and when we go do the when we go to do the hood on the Lady Caroline or the Bronze Mallard, we don't want that tip poking out through the hood. So we're going to bring thread wraps forward. We're going to fold. Just be careful your barbels from your hair in there. We're going to fold these feathers, these barbels back. We're going to wrap, touching turns. Bring my thread back, stem underneath, 90 degrees out again, another wrap, trim, and lock it up underneath. As you can see, I've been able to keep this portion very flat, and that's going to be very key in a few minutes when we get to the hood. It is essential to keep that as flat as possible so we can get the hood to go as flat as possible. I'm going to take the opportunity now to separate some of these barbels. I'm going to begin to bring all of these barbels folded straight down to the bottom of the fly. You have to take your time to do this. Separate some barbels with your bodkin. You're going to have a few. You can twist and pinch pretty hard and get a lot of these barbels to go down and hang down for you. Now, I'm going to do what, in some cases, some people don't like to be done, but I do it so that the original Lady Caroline had a very, very low slung hood. You could almost barely see the body through it. That's the way I prefer to tie it. So what I do not want is any of these additional fibers here sticking up through the hood when I bring it down. So I will actually come in and trim some of those out of the way and keep the top portion of the body as flat as possible. We're going to add another color because I like a little bit of red in most of my flies, and we have this nice red tail here, and I like a little bit of throat of red. I'm going to come to the golden pheasant skin once again. I'm going to go down to more towards the rump area of the pheasant and find a little bit longer barbels, a little bit larger fly. Sometimes it's feather, I should say. Sometimes you can find them on the breast. There we go. And I'm going to trim away the bottom again, the fuzzy stuff on the bottom that we're not going to use, down to the thin part of the stem. I'm going to wrap another color on of red, pheasant, and if you notice, color after color that we put on, feather after feather, have very long flowing barbels. And all that flow is going to be underneath here. It's going to create all this nice movement underneath. A little bit of stragglers here. Again, shiny side towards me, concave side out, the dull side. 3-4 wraps down on the tip. Fold the tip back and lock it in. And again, I'm going to come in and trim this tip out. Bring my thread forward. Wrap my next collar. This feather will give just a nice subtle hint of red. especially once we fold it all down. It has good length. Bring my thread back, up 90 degrees, stem out 90 degrees again, still locking everything underneath to keep things nice and flat. Now I will take that red feather, a golden pheasant feather, and fold it down now as well. There we go. Any heavy stragglers sticking out, a lot of times too, you can just pull on them. Give them a good quick pull. You've got it locked in there real nice, and you can pull it out. Keep all these down below. As you can see, sometimes I come in and I'll twist all the feathers to one side or the other, and that helps pull everything down to where you want it. But even with the heron feather, if I get a long barbel out of place, I will remove that barbel. So now for the hood. The wing on a Lady Caroline is what they call the hood. Generally and traditionally, the hood is put on from what they call bronze mallard. This is select bronze mallard. This is a breast feather off of the mallard, and it comes in a package. There's approximately a dozen, maybe 24 feathers in here. They come left side and right side. So as a pair, you need a left side and a right side for each side of the wing. And we're going to take a quick look at that. And I'm going to select two quickly. Fortunately, right on top. Look like they're big enough. So what I've done is I've chosen two bronze mallard feathers that are quite similar in length and color and size. This one's a little rough. We'll see if we can sort them out. And this is quite large fly, and we want that wing to go back almost to the end of the tail or halfway through the tail. So we need to make sure that we have a feather long enough. So what we have here is bronze mallard feather. We have a left side and a right side. Now we need to prep these feathers beforehand. And what we're going to do is we're going to take all the short stuff on this side and remove it, and all the fluffy stuff on this side and remove it. Just like so, as best we can. I'm going to take the other feather and do the same thing. Generally most of the short stuff on the bottom and the fuzzy stuff on the bottom. And we remove that. The next thing that you want to do, as this takes a little bit of prep work, is you want to find your sides that match up the most and closest in length and color. So because we're doing such a large fly, I'm actually going to take this portion of the feather, and I'm actually going to come in here with my scissors and trim this bottom section off. We can use that at a later date. We're going to have that even on this side. So that's now the right side. The left side, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to find the longest length to where I want to be. I'm going to come in with my bodkin and separate that portion. I'm going to come in with my scissors and I'm going to trim that portion off. These aren't waste. They're just not the length that we want for this particular fly at this particular pattern. This is so that we have much easier access to the length that we want and the size that we want. I'm going to remove these side portions again. Same thing on this side. Now, sizing of your wing is not only length, but it's thickness. If the wing is too thick, it'll wrap over too far on either side, and you won't see any of the body. If it's too thin, it'll tend to want to kick up and ride a little too high. So you're going to have to look at approximately about just under 1/4 of an inch that you want either side. And I would come in with my bodkin and look at that portion about here. And that may be a little wide yet, we'll have to see. So I'm going to trim this off though with the stem attached. So that's going to be essentially in the beginning the right side of my wing. I'm going to come in on the left side, and I'm going to get approximately the same thickness, as close as you can. Come in with my bodkin again and separate it. That even might be a little thin. I'm going to trim it off with the stem. This tends to be, for most people, the most difficult part of a Lady Caroline. They can tend to easily get the rest of the fly tied, body, tail, hackles, the hood to get it fit correctly and get it to flow correctly on there is usually the little bit difficult part. The reason why we trim off each side with the stem is sometimes when you go to wrap on the thread, the barbels will tend to want to separate, which creates a separation all the way down the wing. Leaving the stem on until we get the wing set and locked in before we cut it off keeps those barbels in place and allows them not to separate. So now I'm going to take the left side and the right side, and I'm going to line the tips up the best I can. So that now essentially we have what we're looking at is the hood. I tend to put my hoods on as one piece as opposed to two separate sides. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in to the front here. This might be slightly short, should be alright. I'm going to measure my hood as best I can to the back of the fly. I've got left side, right side like this, side by side, left side, right side, slightly folded over each other. I'm going to come in, right on top, fold, 2 quick turns, tight turns, release. Slightly down a little bit. There's a little bit too much rolled over. So we're going to come back a bit. We can readjust this slightly. Does that piece come apart here? Try this one more time. Come in, pinch, 2 quick tight wraps. And we're slightly folding on one side, but I think we've got it. You can darken up the hood by putting a second hood on, but we're not going to do that. I want this to be seen through a bit. So we're happy with where we are. I'm going to come in again, pinch, 3, 4, 5. That shouldn't happen. Hang on a second here. Again, I'm not panicking. Thread broke. The hood's here, but it's locked in. We were just setting up the head. If you panic and start playing with this, it's going to come right apart on you. Just get our thread back in. Start our thread, 2, 3, 4. Trim. Now we're going to come in and trim our ends off. But I'm still holding the wing in place. I don't want the wing to move. Don't want any of the barbels to move. Quick look here. We're still in good shape, and finish up our head. Come in and whip finish. We have a little bit of fuzzies from when the thread broke, so I'm going to grab my trusty lighter. And if any of you have to do this, it's not for the faint of heart. You have to be a little bit careful. What I'm going to do is hold all the materials back. I'm going to come in with the lighter and just, all I'm doing is passing it by. And all it does is clean up any of the little fuzzies from the thread sticking out. Nothing worse for wear. We didn't lose any feathers. And coming with a little bit of head cement. This is a Loon water-based head cement. It's ultra thin, acts like water, penetrates down through the thread very well, and locks in all these fibers and stuff here. I will come in with a thicker lacquer-based head cement afterwards to toughen it up and clean it up, but this is a great first approach to go with. Dries relatively quickly in a couple of minutes, so if you wanted to keep the fly in the hook and put your heavy lacquer on, you can. So essentially, ladies and gentlemen, that is the Lady Caroline with a bit of a twist. It's a variation of. The hood is generally the most difficult part, but as you can see, the key is to do it relatively quickly. Get your sizing set up, lay it on, 2 quick turns, and pull it tight. Once it's locked in and tight like that, then you'll see if it's going to lay flat or pop up to the top. Popping up isn't that bad. Some people prefer the hood to be a little higher. I prefer a more traditional style and keep it right low just like this. So again, this is the Lady Caroline. Hope you enjoyed this video. Have a good evening.